You know, when you hear the phrase automotive history, a really specific, almost unavoidable image probably pops into your head.
Oh, definitely. You're probably picturing this dimly lit, dusty garage somewhere.
Yeah, exactly. Or like a mechanic just completely covered in grease. And I mean, more often than not, you're anticipating a lot of highly technical, very loud shouting about, torque and horsepower and 0 to 60 times.
Right. It's a genre that has basically built a wall around itself for decades.
Yeah.
It caters almost entirely to gearheads. Like, if you don't inherently care about the bore and stroke of a V8 engine, traditional car media doesn't really give you much of a reason to stick around.
No, it really doesn't.
It treats the car strictly as a mechanical marvel, totally isolated from the rest of the world.
But today, we're throwing the entire playbook out the window.
We really are.
For this deep dive, we've got our hands on a remarkably compelling piece of source material. It is a comprehensive pitch document-like, a show bible for the television industry, and it's detailing a proposed documentary series called Octane Chronicles, or Crónicas del Octanaje.
Right.
And our mission today is to pull this pitch apart and see how it completely reimagines what a car show can actually be. Because this series, it doesn't treat vehicles as mechanical toys at all.
No, not even a little bit.
It treats them as these potent sociological time machines that, quite literally carved out the 20th century. Okay, let's unpack this.
Let's do it.
Reading through this pitch, it doesn't evoke a typical motoring show in the slightest. I mean, to me, it feels more like wandering through an ultra-high-end museum exhibit.
Yes, exactly.
But like one that breathes and moves and actually has a real pulse.
Yeah, and the creators actually distill that exact museum philosophy down into a single anchoring sentence in the document.
Oh, really? Which one?
They write, the engine isn't just engineering, it's the heartbeat of our history.
Oh, wow. That's good.
Right. They are making this massive pivot away from top speeds and lap times. Instead, they're positioning the automobile as the primary catalyst for how human beings, drastically changed the way they lived, worked, and perceived their own freedom over the last 100 years.
That is a huge shift in perspective. But to understand how Octane Chronicles plans to achieve that elevated atmosphere, we really need to examine its most shocking structural choice.
Oh, yeah. The big one.
And it's not about what they are putting on the screen. It's about who is completely absent.
Right.
The show is designed as a 25 to 30-minute docuseries, and, it features absolutely zero on-screen presenters.
None. A total vacuum of on-screen talent.
No charismatic host in a vintage leather jacket kicking the tires. Nothing. And I have to challenge this premise.
Sure.
Look, I understand the artistic purity argument, I really do. But television, especially unscripted television, is a personality-driven medium.
It usually is, yeah.
Viewers show up for the host just as much as the subject matter, right? Without someone to anchor the narrative or make a witty observation or, bridge the gap between the viewer and a cold piece of metal, don't you seriously risk this feeling like a beautifully shot screensaver?
I mean, it is arguably the biggest gamble of the entire pitch.
Right. So how does a 30-minute show sustain any momentum without a human guide?
Well, the document defends it brilliantly, actually. The theory they have is that a host acts as an emotional middleman.
An emotional middleman. Interesting.
Yeah. They tell you how you should feel about a car. By removing that intermediary, the show forces the viewer into a direct, unmediated relationship with the history on screen.
Okay, I can see that.
But the creators know that losing the host means you have to, massively overcompensate with structure.
Right. You need some kind of scaffolding.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So to prevent the show from stagnating, they utilize this relentless 4-part narrative engine for every single episode.
Ah, okay. So instead of a host transitioning between segments, the format itself becomes the guide.
Precisely.
The pitch lays out these 4 recurring themes, right? So we start with everyday, accessible cars. They call it the popular classics.
Right.
Then it aggressively shifts gears into motorcycle culture from the 60s through the 80s.
Yeah, the two-wheel segment.
From there, it dials the clock way back to the pre-war era, focusing on the sheer genesis of automotive engineering.
The pre-war jewels.
And then it always caps off with a deep dive into the pioneers themselves, like the complex figures who actually drafted these machines.
Yeah, and that structure is entirely about pacing and psychological engagement.
How so?
Well, you start with something the viewer immediately recognizes and feels nostalgic about.
Right.
Then you inject the adrenaline of the motorcycle era, followed by the majestic museum-quality history of the pre-war vehicles.
It's like a roller coaster.
Exactly. And you finally ground the episode with heavy, human biographical drama. It's an emotional roller coaster designed to literally make a presenter obsolete.
That opening segment on the popular classics is, honestly, it's wildly manipulative in the best possible way.
Oh, totally.
I mean, I want you listening right now to close your eyes for a second and picture your family's oldest car. You know, the one you grew up in.
Oh man, I can see mine right now.
Right. Think about the specific smell of that upholstery baking in the summer sun. Think about the texture of those burning hot vinyl seats, or, the mixtape that lived permanently in the cassette deck while you were crammed in the back seat on a road trip.
It's so vivid.
The show is actively weaponizing those memories. It's hooking you by saying, hey, this isn't a show about a sedan. This is a show about your childhood.
It bypasses the intellect completely and goes straight for lived experience.
Yeah.
And once they secure that emotional buy-in from the audience, the viewer is far more willing to follow the narrative into the denser, more historical segments that follow.
Okay, let's see how this actually plays out in practice, because the source material outlines their proposed pilot episode, which they title Engines of Freedom.
Right, great title.
And it serves as a perfect stress test for this four-part structure. They don't start with a Ferrari. They start with the Seat 600, or, well, the VW Beetle, depending on the broadcast market.
Which is a remarkably humble starting point if you think about it.
Yeah, very mundane.
But the focus here really highlights their sociological mission. They just gloss over the mechanics of that tiny little engine entirely.
Oh, completely.
The narrative zeroes in on the end of autarky. It's looking at a post-war society transitioning out of severe economic isolation.
Right. The imagery they propose isn't the car on some fancy test track. It's archival footage of a family of 5 squeezing into this impossibly small cabin, tying a mountain of luggage to a flimsy roof rack, and driving to the coast for their very first family vacation.
Exactly.
The car is framed as the ultimate democratizer of travel. It represented the exact moment the working class was finally allowed to explore their own country.
Yeah, it was physical mobility translating directly into upward social mobility.
It's beautiful.
And then the pilot pivots sharply into the two-wheel segment, specifically focusing on the Vespa in the 1960s.
Oh, I love the Vespa.
Right. And again, the scooter itself is secondary to the cultural tidal wave it rode in on. The script traces how the Vespa began as this desperate, cheap mobility solution in a war-torn Europe, but it rapidly mutated into a centerpiece of urban fashion and mod culture.
Yeah, it went from being a utilitarian tool to a full-blown lifestyle accessory.
Totally.
You see it in classic cinema of the era, The Vespa represented youth, independence, and a very specific type of metropolitan rebellion. Like, you didn't just ride a Vespa, you wore it.
That's a great way to put it. Which is a fascinating transition into their third segment on pre-war history, where the pilot tackles the Ford Model T.
Okay, so this is the heavyweight chapter.
Yes, the narrative shifts from personal lifestyle to global industrial revolution. The documentary frames the Model T not just as the death of the horse-drawn carriage, but as the birth of the modern assembly line.
And the psychological weight of that is just immense. I mean, Henry Ford didn't just build a car. He fundamentally rewired human labor.
He really did.
He paid his workers enough so they could actually afford the product they were building, which essentially bootstrapped the modern middle class into existence.
Right, it changed the whole economic structure.
And the pitch makes sure to place all this frantic, accelerating industrialization right against the backdrop of the looming global conflicts of the early 20th century.
It sets a massive global stage, which, of course, naturally funnels into the final biographical segment of the pilot.
Right.
And for this one, they focus on Ferdinand Porsche. And here, the document proves it isn't interested in making a glossy, corporate-approved commercial at all.
No, they don't shy away from the dark stuff.
Exactly. It insists on exploring what it calls the shadows of these pioneers.
Yeah, the pitch outlines a deep dive into Porsche's relationship with the Nazi regime to develop the people's car, the Volkswagen. It details how his undeniable engineering brilliance was inextricably entangled with the machinery of war. And, what stands out to me is how the pitch document approaches this.
How do you mean?
Well, it doesn't attempt to editorialize or hand down a moral verdict on Porsche's legacy. It's just very factual.
Yes, it adopts a strictly observational posture. The show's mandate is to present the historical reality, the chiaroscuro, the deep interplay of light and dark that defines so many historical titans.
Right. It's very balanced. And just to be clear to everyone listening, we're not taking a stance on Porsche's history here either. We are just reporting on how the source material handles these complex historical realities.
Exactly. And by laying out the facts of his involvement without injecting a modern, preachy judgment, the documentary respects the intelligence of the viewer.
That's so rare these days.
It really is. It acknowledges that the bedrock of our modern industrial world was frequently poured in incredibly dark, morally complex circumstances.
It treats history like history, not like a morality play. But this brings up a massive logistical problem.
Oh, what's that?
Well, if you don't have a host on screen physically walking the viewer from a sunny 1960s beach with a Vespa into a grim World War II-era drafting room with Ferdinand Porsche, how do you make those transitions without inducing whiplash?
Yeah. That is a great question.
Like, it just seems jarring.
And that brings us to the staggering visual and auditory design outlined in the Octane Chronicles lookbook.
Right, the lookbook.
The cinematographic strategy is where this pitch truly earns that museum comparison we talked about earlier. They don't just change the subject matter for each segment. They fundamentally overhaul the entire visual language.
Yeah, the specifics they detail for capturing those everyday family classics are just brilliant.
Well, the 35mm stuff.
Yes. They dictate shooting exclusively on 35mm prime lenses to mimic the natural field of human vision.
Wow.
And the color grading pushes heavily into soft, creamy, warm tones like the mustard yellows and pastel greens of the 70s.
Very nostalgic.
And they only shoot during golden hour to capture organic lens flares. But the masterstroke, I think, is overlaying a subtle 16mm film grain onto the digital footage.
Yeah, and that grain isn't just an Instagram filter.
No.
It is a psychological trigger.
Yeah.
It subconsciously fires off the same receptors in the brain that activate when you watch old family home movies.
Oh, that makes so much sense.
Right. It artificially induces nostalgia before a single word is even spoken.
That is so clever.
Cool.
But then, the moment they transition to the motorcycle segment, the visual rulebook is completely shredded.
Thrown out entirely.
The pitch demands vibrant, aggressive primary colors, like a screaming red gas tank against stark, dark asphalt.
Oh, yeah.
And they specify shooting from extremely low angles, practically scraping the ground. It's designed to look like a high-end, razor-sharp fashion spread from a 1970s magazine.
It completely emphasizes aggression, speed, and chrome.
Exactly.
But then contrast that with the pre-war segment. The aesthetic slows way down.
Right.
The lighting shifts to a Rembrandt-style deep, heavy shadows, where the vehicle barely emerges from the darkness.
Very dramatic.
The color palette desaturates into bronzes and rich woods. Furthermore, they mandate the use of heavy telephoto lenses.
Which completely changes the spatial relationship, right?
Exactly.
Because a wide lens makes you feel like you're standing right next to the car, but a telephoto lens compresses the background and flattens the image.
Yeah, it isolates it.
It isolates the vehicle, making a 1920s Bugatti look like an untouchable monolith on a pedestal. It literally forces reverence.
It really does. And for the final biographical segment, they employ a moody, monochromatic, film noir lighting style.
To match the shadows.
Yes. But their approach to archival photography is what keeps the momentum alive here.
Yeah.
Because instead of panning across static, flat, black and white photos, they use a visual effects technique called parallax.
Oh, that's where they digitally cut the foreground subject out from the background and move them at different speeds, right?
It's the one.
It creates this artificial three-dimensional depth. It literally makes these long-dead engineers feel like they are breathing and shifting inside the frame.
It ensures the visual momentum never dies. It's
Right.
so dynamic.
Yeah.
But, considering the lack of a presenter, the visual design is only carrying half the burden.
Oh, right. The audio.
The soundscape has to do an unbelievable amount of heavy lifting.
The audio design pitch might actually be my favorite detail in the entire document. Because there is no central host, they utilize 4 completely distinct voiceover actors for every single episode.
Yeah.
Like, one dedicated voice for each historical segment.
It operates as a subconscious auditory cue.
It's brilliant. It's exactly like wandering through a massive museum and having your audio guide seamlessly switch narrators depending on which wing you just walked into.
That's a perfect analogy.
You get a warm, inviting voice for the family cars, a rhythmic, high-energy voice for the motorcycles,
Right.
a deep, institutional, almost theatrical voice for the pre-war museum pieces, and a hushed, investigative tone for the biographical shadows.
And the auditory world building extends deeply into the Foley work as well.
Oh, sound effects.
Yeah. The pitch stresses that the sound of a revving engine should never overpower the narrative, but the textural sounds must be historically flawless.
What do you mean by textural?
Well, they don't just want a generic car door sound.
Okay.
They want the exact, teeny, metallic clatter of a seat 600 door slamming shut. They want the specific, heavy, uneven idle of a 1920s carburetor.
Wow, the attention to detail is insane. They even use those hyper-specific Foley sounds as narrative bumpers, don't they?
Yes,
It's like you don't get a graphic on screen saying segment 2. You get the visceral, mechanical crunch of a vintage gear shift to signify that we are moving forward in time.
It's so smart.
It creates this fully immersive sensory timeline where you are quite literally hearing the machinery of the century evolving.
It's a complete masterclass in immersive storytelling.
It really is.
But, from a television executive's perspective, a gorgeous pilot with incredible sound design is just a proof of concept.
Yeah.
The true test of a docuseries pitch is its legs. Like, can this hyper-stylized, highly rigid format sustain itself for an entire season, or does it burn out after 3 episodes?
Right. It's the classic pitch dilemma. You can make an award-winning half-hour on the Model T, but doing it 12 times without the audience feeling the formula is incredibly difficult.
Extremely difficult.
So let's analyze the 12-episode roadmap and the broader business strategy they've mapped out in the Bible. Does it have enough gas?
Well, they mitigate the risk of repetition through massive geographical and cultural diversity.
Okay.
Over the course of the first season, the roadmap bounces between the automotive histories of Spain, Germany, Italy, the UK, the US, and Japan.
Which is an incredibly shrewd move for distribution.
Oh, absolutely.
If you want a streaming giant to buy this, it can't just be the history of American muscle cars. It needs to speak to the cultural history of multiple massive international subscriber bases.
Furthermore, they've constructed a very deliberate emotional arc for the season itself.
How does that work?
They purposefully open episode 1 with the Seat 600, a deeply accessible working-class vehicle that relies heavily on family nostalgia.
Right, we talked about that.
But as the season progresses, they slowly ramp up the prestige, culminating in episode 12 with the classic Porsche 911.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, they transition the viewer from the muddy realities of everyday post-war life to the absolute pinnacle of aspirational design, leaving the audience on a high note, totally primed for season 2.
That is smart pacing. And they also inject a lot of much-needed adrenaline into the biographical segments by leaning hard into historical rivalries, right?
The drama.
The roadmap highlights an entire episode dedicated to the bitter, ego-driven feud between Ferruccio Lamborghini and Enzo Ferrari.
Oh, that's going to be a great episode.
I know. And another episode unpacks the sheer marketing audacity of André Citroën. They are ensuring that the human element isn't just dry biography, it's fueled by ambition, spite, and corporate espionage.
It guarantees the human drama remains as explosive as the engines. And when you look at the business case they build around this content, their understanding of the modern streaming landscape is just razor sharp.
Well, the demographic targeting is fascinating. They are aiming squarely at men and women between 35 and 65 years old.
Right.
And the psychological hook there is obvious. They have the lived nostalgia for these vehicles, and more importantly for sponsors, they have the disposable income.
The sweet spot.
But they also carve out a secondary demographic of young 20-something enthusiasts who are just obsessed with vintage analog design.
And capturing those two distinct groups is the holy grail for platforms like Amazon Prime or Netflix. The pitch explicitly markets the series as comfort content.
Comfort content. Yeah, the streaming era loves comfort content.
It really does.
Think about how you consume media on a lazy Sunday afternoon. You don't always want a high-stress, abrasive thriller.
No, definitely not.
Sometimes you want something visually stunning, intellectually stimulating, but not exhausting, or you can just let the craftsmanship wash over you.
Exactly. And from a monetization standpoint, the decision to eliminate the on-screen host pays off massively here.
Wait, oh so?
Well, when you don't have a celebrity presenter pulling focus or injecting their own controversial opinions, the car itself remains the undisputed star.
Oh, I see.
The environment is completely controlled and pristine. That makes this format an irresistible magnet for ultra-high-end brand partnerships.
Ah, that makes perfect sense. The potential sponsors they list align perfectly with this vibe, like classic car insurance syndicates, heritage tire manufacturers, bespoke restoration shops,
Exactly.
and crucially, luxury watchmakers.
Huge money there.
Brands that trade on their own deep historical legacies want their products sitting adjacent to this kind of beautiful, reverent storytelling. The entire series operates as a very elegant, highly profitable commercial proposition draped in the clothing of an art house documentary.
It is a phenomenal blend of artistic vision and commercial viability.
So bringing all of these threads together, what Octane Chronicles proves is that the traditional motoring show is completely ripe for disruption.
Long overdue.
You do not need a guy yelling in a hangar to make automotive history engaging. By treating the car as a sociological artifact, utilizing a deeply manipulative and stunningly varied cinematic language, and relying on a relentless four-part structure, they've essentially created a time machine.
That's a great way to summarize it.
They take glass, rubber, and steel and use it as a mirror to reflect the sweeping cultural shifts of the entire 20th century.
It completely elevates the machine into a testament of human ambition and progress.
Yeah, it really does.
And, if we pull that thread all the way to the present day,
Right.
well, if the vehicles of the past century, like the Model T that brooked the middle class, the Vespa that armed a youth rebellion, the 911 that defined modern aspiration, if they are the definitive storytellers of our history, take a look at the vehicles in your driveway or on your street right now. Our silent EVs, our algorithmic rideshare networks, our autonomous driverless technology. What will those machines tell documentarians in 100 years about who we are and what we value right now?